Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam were all at about 4 to 5 billion in 1995 in exports. And today, Bangladesh is, I think, crossed 50 billion. Vietnam is about 238 billion, and Sri Lanka is yet at about 16 billion in total. And one of the key insights that has come out is that the free trade agreements are the ways that they have built the business. Uh, does Jeff get involved in pushing for free trade agreements? Is the question that Danushka is asking.
Absolutely. So, in terms of that's part of it. I think there's also another factor you have to look at is the size. So Sri Lanka doesn't, I think Bangladesh's employment in the industry it's massive. So there is a scale issue in a sense. It's not apples and apples that you're looking at. But I do 100% agree that the growth trajectory is linked very closely to FTAs. And in that respect, right now, our biggest call out is the need for developments of FTAs. Currently, Sri Lanka only benefits from GSP Plus and DCTS, I think is the UK one, essentially the same scheme. But an interesting point is that on that scheme, both in the UK and the EU, the scheme is conditional on fabric from a SAARC country. So this is a bit of a technicality. So the rules of origin on the GSP scheme has certain restrictions on rules of origin. So for us to be able to comply and to benefit, the fabric has to come out of either Sri Lanka or a SAARC country. So if we use fabric from China or Taiwan or wherever, it doesn't qualify. This is a big difference between, say, an EBA, which is what Bangladesh is because it's an LDC. You can use fabric from anywhere. And because of that, Sri Lanka's utilization on apparel is only at about 50%. So all the garments that we ship to the UK and Europe, that bundle them together, only 50% of them qualify. And the reason for that is the balance 50% are using fabrics that don't qualify. So this has been a key ask of us because the current round of GSP is due for renewal in 2024. I think the current scheme runs till the end of 2023 and the new scheme 2024. And so this is the whole need for trade agreements is probably our single biggest agenda item. So yes, we do a lot of our lobbying in terms of trying to encourage looking at that, and that's not just in relation to our existing markets. So certainly in terms of GSP Plus for the EU and DCTS for the UK, but also in terms of say pushing for free trade agreements with China, with India, where we have some opportunities to grow. I will mention in India, with regards to India, there is a ISFTA where there is an 8 million piece quota that we can ship duty free. But quite frankly, that's an absolutely tiny number of garments, and in that it includes things like gloves and socks and so on. So if you export a pair of socks, it's actually 2 pieces of quota. If you export a pair of gloves, it's 2 pieces of quota. So the 8 million gets used up very, very quickly. But absolutely, I mean, the trade agenda to make sure that Sri Lanka has a competitive trade edge in terms of some sort of preferential market access is one of JOB's main issues that we're looking at.
So as we have our viewers coming in, let me warmly welcome all of you with a very good afternoon and welcome back again for another session in our series of MBA Diaries, where we will be meeting experts. So as Asia Pacific Institute of Information Technology, known as APIT Sri Lanka, we are honored to be hosting this session today as well with another veteran in the global corporate world. So to start with, let me warmly welcome the special guest today, who will be introduced very soon by our own team. And of course, a warm welcome to all our students who are joining us today, and all the other partners and our colleagues who are joining from different parts of the world, and of course, all the other corporates and global delegates who are joining us from different parts of the world as well. So with that, let me warmly welcome our chairman of Apparel Sri Lanka, Mr. Bandula Egodage, to share his welcome expressions. Chairman, over to you.
Kaushali, thank you very much, Kaushali, for the as usual start. So actually it's a privilege for me to welcome today the chief guest, known as very known figure in as an industry giant. So on behalf of APIT Board of Directors, our lecture panels, and our teachers, our students, very warmly welcome you for this important session, Johan. Thank you for being with us in spite of your busy schedule on an invitation of Dr. Rohanta. APIT, basically known as for the quality education. Everybody who is joining APIT and he will be passed out as a graduate, but we have one step ahead and we have one extra mile for each and every one. We want to have some right balance of their lives and we want to build it up on the certain leaderships and the skills with them. So this is initiated by Dr. Rohanta, and so far we manage about 100 odd opinion leaders, industry giants that to have a direct interaction with APIT students population. Now, for everybody's information, actually, not the students now. This is the normal feature of CEO diary or opinion leaders diary of APIT. Even today, I was told that many diplomatic people and external people and also the recorded version they are requesting based on the industry dialogue that we have today. Even another important thing, and we are giving direct interaction for all our students who getting more closer look and share their experience with people like you, Johan. It is very rare opportunity. Even during your school time, your university time, think of it, we didn't have this opportunity. You are coming here, your apparel giant, all these students, they have opportunity to directly question you or directly ask you. I mean, it's a quite important interaction that we are giving. That is what I said. It is not only the academic excellence, it is basically the practical know-how that quite important in this decade. So that is the objective. We want to give that right experience with the industry leaders. So thank you for accepting that. And once again, it's really would like to see you and personally as well as officially for this important webinar. Without further ado, I think I would like to hand over this to Dr. Rohan and Hasuli and also Ruth for the next proceedings. Take care, sir. Thank you very much being with us, Johan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And it's actually an honor today. As you know, today is Teachers' Day. And today, Johan is taking a role of a teacher. It's something very special. So we have a very respected business professional with a 20-year track record in the apparel industry of Sri Lanka. He has a Bachelor of Science, Graduate Economics from the University of College of London, and he went on to read for the MBA from the Middlesex University in UK. Starting his career at Coates Viela, UK PLC company, then set up the box sweater manufacturing facility in Sri Lanka for Marks and Spencer in the UK. He was responsible for the technology transfer from the UK to Sri Lanka and made a greenfield business and a fully fledged business operation over here in Sri Lanka. And he went on to be the assistant general manager of Coates Viela, Sri Lanka. Subsequently, he was appointed as the country manager for Quantum Clothing, Sri Lanka, and his tenure of 17 years, he drove the P&L to be a $30 million business. He then championed the design and build of the group's facility in India, and Quantum Clothing received the accolade as the coveted Marks and Spencer Supplier of the Year. The factory went on to be the first ISO 26,000 factory in Sri Lanka. Joining the top apparel company Inquib Global PLC as Chief Operating Officer for Business Sustainability and covering Sri Lanka and Cambodia, he went on to give leadership in sustainability and governance, where he went on to be seconded to the Joint Apparel Association Forum and now serves as the Secretary General of JEF, the only industry chamber for the $6 billion apparel industry of Sri Lanka. He serves on multiple support entities such as National Labour Advisory Committee, Wages Board, Sri Lanka Apparel Exporters Association, and the Export Development Board. Board member also of the Institute of Textile and Apparel. Ladies and gentlemen, I have absolute honor to introduce the Secretary General of the Joint Apparel Associates Forum, Yohan Lawrence, who will tell us about the apparel industry of today and the challenges for 2023. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rohan. Just check I'm audible and visible and all of that. Thank you, Rapid, for inviting me. I'm honored. I think you might. I think Dr. Bangala might have to update his next speech to say he had 100 giants and one small person. So very honored to be here. Definitely not a giant, but happy to share whatever knowledge and information I have. Been a great advocate of sharing of knowledge, of trying to make sure that we give people coming up behind us the absolute best to prepare themselves for life. So thank you again to Apit for inviting me, and thank you, Rohan. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't have a presentation because I kind of tend to prefer to just talk off the cuff, and so I'll talk for probably 15-20 minutes or so, and then leave it open for questions, because I think that would be the most interactive and the most productive use for everybody else as well. So the topic Rohan asked me to talk on was in relation of the industry today and challenges for 2023. And to come into that, I'm just going to talk very briefly on the history of the industry, because there's a lot in the history, there's a lot in what we've done, there's a lot of lessons that are going to prepare us for what comes ahead. So the apparel industry goes back to about the 1970s, when there were a few industrialists who ventured out into apparel products. And these are mostly small family-owned companies, as they were. Companies like Hentley's, Maxim's, Bernard, Buteju, Velona, which are all small family Sri Lankan entrepreneurs like Hydramani and so on, who all came into this field. It then changed in 1977 when the then UNP government brought in an open economy concept, both in respect of the imports and exports. So prior to that, Sri Lanka had been very much a closed economy, and in 1977, the opening of the economy allowed the industry to grow, and it allowed people to push for industry to start setting up. And we started seeing this build up. And over that period, companies who are still very much around today, the big three, MAS, Brandix, Hydramani, all started up around the sort of early 70s. So really these businesses that are today at the forefront and the biggest in the country are companies which started out as smaller family businesses somewhere in the 70s. The next big step change came around 1991, where the then President Ranasinghe Premadasa set up something called the 200 Garment Factory Program. And this was a vital change in the industry. It really was a step up. And the idea at the time was that the objective was to have 200 factories located in locations that were outside of Kapanayaka, Biagama, and the free trade zones and so on. The whole idea was that the industry was encouraged to take work to where employees were based, rather than setting up factories inside industrial parks and zones. Industry factories had to provide uniforms, they had to provide a meal, the factory had to be of a certain standard. So there was this target of 500 factories, 200 people, 100,000 people. And today we still have in the industry a number of factories which are originally set up during that era. It was also the change in terms of the governance structure, because there was then the creation of the BOI. It was previously called the GCEC. But what the BOI said, the setting up of the BOI, was that it was set up to be a true one-stop shop in terms of only going to one place. So if you wanted to set up a factory, you went to the BOI, and then they, as the central location, managed all your approvals, they managed all your permissions and so on. And as an investor, you didn't have to go from pillar to post. And what that allowed us to do was to grow the industry rapidly. So just as a sort of snapshot, in 1991, apparel exports were about 750 million. And by 2000, they were 2.7 billion. So in that 10-year period, kicked off from the 1991, the industry probably tripled in size. And it's that boost on that step up that we had in 1991, which is what allowed us to grow to where we are. And this is important in terms of where we're going next. So a few of the lessons that came from that era was, one was taking work to the village rather than relying on people having to travel into work. And this is a trend that still continues in the industry. So we, as an industry, we employ around 350,000 people directly. If you take Katnaika zone, we probably have under 15,000 people there. So over the years, the initiatives that were set up to take work out have just been built on, and this is why the factories are now located across the country, across the length and the breadth of the country. That was also possible, as I mentioned, because of this truly enabling environment that was set up by the BOI to be this true one-stop shop. So people didn't go from pillar to post, and you had a very easy way to move through. We then come to 2005 and the end of what was called a multi-fiber agreement, which was essentially the quota system to the US. And by that point, the industry was running at around 3 billion. And there was a view that come 2005, when Sri Lanka lost its quota, because the MFA, which was the scheme in the US whereby companies could have quota, and if you had quota, you were sure of a buyer. So there was a view at the time that the end of the MFA was going to sort of sound the death knell on the apparel industry. And there was a prediction that after 2005, it would pretty much collapse. So at that time, it was around the same time the JAF, which is the apex body of the association, was formed. And that was really to develop a strategy to take apparel from 2.3 billion to 4.5 billion. It was also then shifted the move away from being a contract manufacturer, where somebody else basically gave you the patterns, gave you the work, gave you the fabric, everything, and all you did was what we call a CMT, the cut, make, and trim, cut, make, and pack part of the operation, to be a total solutions provider, where we would offer our customers not just the manufacturing piece, but both widen what we offer them in the supply chain. We also identified 4 product categories, which is still relevant today: lingerie, activewear, kids, and casual wear, because those were the 4 product categories that we felt Sri Lanka had already made its name in and would build on. So certain categories we knew we would not be able to compete. Formal shirts, for example, suits, ties, these are not categories that work for Sri Lanka for a number of complex reasons. So the idea was that we just consolidated and worked with this kind of country-first attitude. We then also started looking at, as the landscape changed post 2005, we started getting some preferential access through the EU through our GSP Plus program, which still operates as of today. There was also then a heavy investment in technology, CAD/CAM, ERP systems, development of backward linkages, so the growth of fabric mills, development of things like seamless knitting, accessories. As Radha mentioned, I come from the lingerie background, and you could, if you kind of break a bra down, it has 34 different components, and we got to the point where we could pretty much get most of them in Sri Lanka. So the fact that you had close raw materials at close to your needle point meant that you could turn around things quicker, so it shortened lead times. It just added to the proposition that we gave to customers. We then also started down our journey on environmental sustainability, on employee well-being, and so on. And we kind of took and we developed a program called Garments Without Guilt, which was meant to highlight what the industry was doing, because we realized then, and this is valid even today, that Sri Lanka tends to be ahead of the curve in terms of things. So we were talking about compliance to laws and labor laws, protecting of human rights, and so on, well before it became the norm. We were talking about the environment and the need to operate businesses in an environmentally sustainable manner long before it became the fashion. Today, the buzzwords are now circularity, sustainability, and in all of these areas, Sri Lanka has been ahead of the curve. And this is what's given us the edge in terms of being able to kind of be that preferred solutions provider for the apparel sector. And if you graph, I can't share it with you, but if you graph the export growth, you see these two very big markers, one in 1991, and then again in 2005, where there was a slight dip in 2004, and then things just absolutely picked up. So where are we today? So global apparel exports are around $500 billion. Sri Lanka's apparel exports are 5 billion. So if we're lucky and we extend it a little bit, it's just about 1% of global apparel trade. And this is important because whilst apparel is very important in the Sri Lankan economy, it's tiny on the world landscape. Just to give you an example, so we are at about a $6 billion industry. China is 266 billion. Bangladesh and Vietnam are around 40 billion. So even with our growth trajectory, we're saying our growth trajectory is saying 8 billion by 2025. We still, Sri Lanka is never going to be a large player. So it's a fairly unique business model because it's a very large component of the Sri Lankan footprint and what we do in Sri Lanka. It's a large part. We are 47% of our exports come from our 7% of GDP. So we're a large player in terms of the domestic economy or the domestic market, but a tiny player in the worldwide things. And that changes your perspective on things and what you can negotiate. It changes your position of power. In the world of our buyers, Sri Lanka is, you're not competitive, you're just not thought of. And these are important things when we position ourselves because there is an issue of balance of power, and brands are much bigger than us. Brands place a very small percentage of what they buy in Sri Lanka, so you're not in a position to negotiate much because the balance of power sits against you. In terms of where we're going into now and the macroeconomic picture of Sri Lanka, as I'm sure we're all aware, right now Sri Lanka's foreign exchange comes from three main pillars. That's tourism, worker remittances, and exports. Tourism, we know the situation. We know that tourism revenue is low. We're hopeful that things will pick up. There's movement to this. There's foreign tourists starting to come back in. But it's also important to understand that in Sri Lanka's calculations of revenue from tourism, there is a number of big assumptions that are made, and that's a separate topic of discussion. And somebody who's interested in how Sri Lanka's availability of dollars is, if you look at how the tourism number is calculated, it's a little scary, and also that money doesn't come into the central bank and it doesn't come through the system. Worker remittances, we know, are exceedingly low due to a number of issues, particularly over the exchange rate, and therefore that inflow has also stopped. So that leaves the export sector, and I classify the export sector in two parts. There's the manufacturing, which we have a bigger part, and there's the services export sector. Unfortunately, in the services export sector, unlike in manufacturing, because you don't export a good per se, you export a service. There's very little traceability as to what's actually exported and what's actually come back in, and so on. And this is why I think what's come of recent with the economic crisis and the shortage of dollars is, as you peel away the bits of what you're supposed to get in, you realize that the primary source is the merchandise exports, because that's traceable, that can be tracked back to how much you've exported, how much you brought back, and what dollars you brought in. And I think what the economic crisis has taught us is that some of our assumptions about the remittance, about the value of inward foreign exchange from all the other sources is perhaps not as sound as we might think. It can't be tested. And the point I'm trying to make is not to boost how important the apparel industry is and it's so big, but it's an important factor in terms of Sri Lanka's economic crisis and how we can play our role in helping to pull Sri Lanka out of this crisis. Some of you may be sort of marketing graduates, and it's always an interesting perspective because Sri Lanka, our export markets are very. We have three big markets. We export to the US, we export to the EU, and we export to the UK. Those three markets account for probably around 85% of what we export. And some of the balance that's shipped to other parts of the world is actually orders done for brands. So if I take, for example, a brand, say Nike, for example, they may say, we want you to ship this quantity to Australia, we want you to ship this quantity to Japan. This comes from this whole value addition piece that we say, fine, if you want to ship to somewhere in this part of the world, we can manage that for you. We'll handle your stock, we'll send your shipments. So in reality, those three markets probably are actually account for more than the 85%, but for purpose of this discussion, we can call it 85%. And there's always been a big debate as to why Sri Lanka can't diversify, why we can't get into new markets. And the answer is very simple. The answer is very simple, is that, to get into a new market, you need to have some form of preferential market access. Without that, you're up against it, because Sri Lanka is not the cheapest place to make apparel. That ship sailed a long time ago. And therefore, if you're not the cheapest product, and you're also trying to compete with somebody who has duty-free facilities for importing to that market, then you're as good as dead. So right now, and traditionally, these have been our three main markets, and where companies have had a look at trying to expand in other markets, the success has been fairly limited. So what do we bring to the table, and how does the industry still remain competitive? So the talent is a big part of it, not just from team members and sewing operatives, but right through the scheme, right through the whole system, right through to GMs, to CEOs, and so on. As a result of it, we have a number of Sri Lankans in countries like Bangladesh, where the talent has been recognized and taken, but we take that on the cuff. That's part and parcel of the growth strategy. People have the right to move on. We also have our strong ethical, social, environmental piece, because that is becoming more and more important. And I think, again, post-COVID, the mindset of buyers and things they're looking for does include things like, what's your position on ESG? Where are you? What are you doing about your emissions and stuff like this? So this is all this whole sphere that has gone well beyond just the treatment of employees. We also started to grow the supply chain. So there's now a number of fabric mills in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka does still rely on a large amount of fabric from overseas. We do have a value addition of around 50%, which means that for every $100 we export, about $50 of it stays in Sri Lanka. So it's better than it used to be, and a big part of that is increasing the supply chain. So Sri Lanka sits quite nicely poised. We have short shipping times. We have the right environment, and this is what kind of gives us our unique unique place in the whole supply chain. What are our challenges for 2023? I think there's a few key things that I want to touch on. On the plus side, there is a trade shift that's happening, post the pandemic, and also as a part of the fallout out of the Russia-Ukraine war, is that a lot of our customers are looking to de-risk other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And therefore, Sri Lanka is well poised to be able to gain on that as companies look to de-risk what they're buying out of countries like China. So there is a sliver of hope there. But what are our main challenges? I think our main challenges are really around remaining. I'd say it's two pieces. One is to remain competitive, because your reputation, what you do, will only take you so far. That will get you your foot in the door, but that won't get you the sale. So how do we remain competitive? Price is a very difficult issue. Sure, a lot of people say, the dollar is depreciated now. The rupee is depreciated heavily against the dollar. That's got to make exports more competitive. It does and it doesn't, because it does. But what has happened, as all of us are aware, is the massive inflation that's followed very quickly. Now, typically, when the rupee got weaker and so on, exporters had an immediate benefit, because you obviously had more rupees than you did prior to that. But what we found this time with the economic crisis is that the inflation, and highest inflation, as we all know, is in food and fuel, both of which are big factors for companies to operate in. So yes, the currency made it more. It gives us more rupees, but the rupee inflation, which came very, very quickly, eroded any benefit from that. So trying to stay competitive in price is one. Being competitive on the ESG arena is the second one, because right now it's something that Sri Lanka has a head start. We've been talking about this, but there are some big challenges. The whole issue about the country's generation of power, the sources of its generation of power, the whole issue of the CB and the limitations that the CB and the CB Act bringing in renewables changes the ability, because there's only so much companies can do by putting putting solar on their roofs. It has to take a step change beyond that. Digitalization is our big challenge, and we still, Sri Lanka still lives in an era where, everything is paper-based. If any of your companies have an exposure to the paperwork that's required on imports or exports, you know what I mean. It's just completely, it's time-consuming, it's costly, and it just prevents us from moving forwards. I think the biggest challenge, though, that Sri Lanka is going to face in terms of particularly recovering from the crisis is around how we make a step change in our exports. And this is not just apparel, but merchandise exports in total. Because we know now, we've learned in the last year or so, is how the merchandise export sector is far more important than we had previously thought. It's also been clearly identified by everybody that exports need to grow. We need to, the country has to export more. Unfortunately, to do that, and this means taking a step change. Just to give you some numbers, Sri Lanka's industrial exports are around $12 billion a year. This is industrial exports, not just apparel, but all industrial exports. And the estimates of where Sri Lanka should be, if you look at our macro figures, we should be around 22 billion. So we should be exporting almost double what we're doing. And in order to do this, we're going to have to create an environment that's going to attract new foreign direct investment and encourage existing investors to grow their footprint. And we're not going to do that by doing the same things, because we have to make sure that Sri Lanka remains a competitive place for an investment. If a company is looking to invest $30 million in a factory, why should they come to Sri Lanka? We have to make Sri Lanka the relevant place so that in their minds, this is the home for their FDIs. It's coming straight into Sri Lanka. So in order to do that, we have a number of challenges, and some of them we'll touch on. One is in terms of the whole consistency of government policy. So what investors want is they want to know what they're getting into, and they don't want the rules to change as you go along. They don't want to come in and set up a business and then have a ad hoc tax that's brought in. They don't want to have sudden changes of policy. They don't want to have sudden changes of laws. So we need to ensure that we have this consistent policy that stays true to attract investors. Another big area that challenge for us is around labor regulations. If you want a lesson in history, you can have a look back at how far back our labor regulations go. They've never been amended to reflect the needs of the time, and therefore, again, Sri Lanka comes to these things with an uncompetitive edge in terms of what somebody else is offering. And these are things that an investor will look at, and they will say, well, yeah, if I put my money in Sri Lanka, these are the issues that I have. So we have to take these things head on, and right now is the time to be able to do this, given what's happened in the last year and a half. This is the time to say, hang on, let's just reform. Let's reform how we do things, how we attract trade. There's certain sectors that still need liberalization for the economy to grow. Domestically, we need to liberalize both in terms of generation, certainly the generation of power, if not the distribution, to liberalize in terms of the CPC and its hold that it has on the economy and the restrictions that it brings in. And we also need to liberalize certain industries where we still closed up. We have to move to this open market economy where the government plays the role of the regulator, puts down the regulations and gives us the environment, but the government's not a player in the equation. And finally, we have to have a competitive tax regime. I know there's been a lot of discussion over the last few days about tax holidays and tax rates and so on. The point is this: at the end of the day, people who want to invest have options. They could invest in Sri Lanka, but they could also invest in Vietnam, or they could invest in Bangladesh. And if we don't have a platform that is going to be, people will wait up and they'll do their SWOTs and they'll look at the pros and the cons. And if Sri Lanka comes out negative on paper, then they're going to take their investment elsewhere. So with all due respect to Dr. Harsha, I would say that the question should not have been, what is the loss to the country of giving a company a tax holiday, but what is the benefit to the country by giving a tax holiday and that company coming into the economy? So we need to kind of like revisit how we look at this, and we need to, as I say, make sure that we are creating a platform, that we're creating an environment that will attract new FDIs. Because if we're not, then we won't have the wherewithal to make this step change. So that's about it from me. I've talked for as long as I really can. I would now happily pass it back, and happy to have any conversations either in terms of what I've talked about or any other piece. Ron, is there anything else you think of this?
Thank you so much, Johan. A fantastic summary of what the challenges are looking like. A whole heap of questions are coming from different parts of different batches actually on the MBA program, and the first one is coming from Madhusha, who is working. Actually, he's working off based out of Uganda.
Oh wow!
We have some international students, and the question is very, very interesting question. Asking, do you see any key changes of post today's UN resolution, which is supposed to happen this evening?
I don't think so. So I'm guessing this is all. So obviously, Sri Lanka's human rights is an important part of GSP Plus, and I think this is where the question comes from. There's many sides to this. I mean, that no country is perfect. I was interested. The US put out a report recently on countries of risks that have risks of child labor and forced labor, and thank goodness Sri Lanka is not named in it, but there's a number of our competitor countries who still continue to receive benefits of FTAs and so on that sit on that list. So I think all of these things are have to be taken as a whole picture. Obviously, we would want for these things to be addressed and for things to kind of move on from them. I think generally with all of these things, there will be then a course of discussion where we call on the government to make the commitments that's necessary to ensure that these things are dealt with. So it's not something that overly jumps out at us right now.
If I may add, Johan, as per yesterday, what they were saying was that given that the people are going through some very rough times in the country, like 38.8% of people having this malnourishment issue, and they're saying that almost 40% of people might be in poverty by December. So given that background, apparently the latest data is that they don't want to put any kind of adverse burden on the people of the country, and they're saying that the UNHCR resolution will be targeted to individuals rather than the country. So that's something that came out yesterday, which I thought I will also just share it with the student community to update of the reason. But we'll have to watch and see what happens today in the evening. Nice question coming from Hashankar, and he's an MBA student, second year MBA student, and he's saying Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam were all at about 4 to 5 billion in 1995 in exports, and today Bangladesh is, I think, crossed 50 billion. Vietnam is about 238 billion, and Sri Lanka is yet at about 16 billion in total. And one of the key insights that has come out is that the free trade agreements are the ways that they have built the business. Does Jeff get involved in pushing for free trade agreements is the question that Danushka is asking.
Absolutely. So in terms of that's part of it. I think there's also another factor you have to look at is the size. So Sri Lanka doesn't, I think Bangladesh's employment in the industry, it's massive. So there is a scale issue in a sense. It's not apples and apples that you're looking at. But I do 100% agree that the growth trajectory is linked very closely to FTAs. And in that respect, right now, our biggest call out is the need for developments of FTA. Currently, Sri Lanka only benefits from GSP Plus and DCTS, I think is the UK one, essentially the same scheme. But an interesting point is that on that scheme, both in the UK and the EU, the scheme is conditional on fabric from a SAARC country. There is a bit of a technicality. So the rules of origin on the GSP scheme has certain restrictions on rules of origin. So for us to be able to comply and to benefit, the fabric has to come out of either Sri Lanka or the SAARC country. So if we use fabric from China or Taiwan or wherever, it doesn't qualify. This is a big difference between, say, an EBA, which is what Bangladesh is, because it's an NEC. You can use fabric from anywhere. And because of that, Sri Lanka's utilization on apparel is only at about 50%. So all the garments that we ship to the UK and Europe, if I partner them together, only 50% of them qualify. And the reason for that is the balance 50% are using fabrics that don't qualify. So this has been a key ask of us, because the current round of GSP is due for renewal in 2024. I think the current scheme runs till the end of 2023 and the new scheme 2024. And so this is the whole need for trade agreements is probably our single biggest agenda item. So yes, we do a lot of our lobbying in terms of trying to encourage looking at that, and that's not just in relation to our existing markets. So certainly in terms of GSP Plus for the EU and DCTS for the UK, but also in terms of, say, free trade agreement, pushing for free trade agreements with China, with India, where we have some opportunities to grow. I will mention in India, with regards to India, there is a ISFTA where there is an 8 million piece quota that we can ship duty free. But quite frankly, that's an absolutely tiny number of garments, and in that it includes things like gloves and socks and so on. So if you export a pair of socks, it's actually 2 pieces of quota. If you export a pair of gloves, it's 2 pieces of quota. So the 8 million gets used up very, very quickly. But absolutely, I mean, the trade agenda to make sure that Sri Lanka has a competitive trade edge in terms of some sort of preferential market access is one of JOB's main issues that we're looking at.
There's a question coming from Kisal, finally a student on the MBA program, and he's asking, what made you want to come down to Sri Lanka when you had a very good career going in the UK? And do you regret coming to Sri Lanka?
Topic very topic. And actually, if I make it worse, I came back. I went twice and I came back twice. So it's not you say you learn from your mistakes. So I think the point was this. So I went to the UK when I was kind of I went in 1983 originally when everything broke out here, and I spent 8 or 9 years at school at university, and I felt my heart belonged here. So I came back in, and then was working for 8 or 9 years. And at the time I came back, it was always going to say, come back and go back and do your masters in a year or 2 years or something. And then sort of suddenly you have one of those moments, you kind of woke up and think, gosh, it's 9 years since I've been back, and kind of like one of those moments when you wake up and you think, what am I doing? Where's my life headed? And I felt then it was the right thing to do, to go back and do my master's. It was exceedingly difficult at the time because by that point I was married, and so that meant both of us had to go and find a way to be able to, for me to study in full time and so on. So we went and did that, and we were then at the point when I finished that where we had this kind of thing, do we come back? This was by now. This is 1999 when I finished my MBA, and we were kind of debating what to do. And unfortunately, or unfortunately, to me, it just didn't feel right. It felt that home was kind of where the heart is, and we debated this a lot because if you pack up and you go overseas, yes, absolutely, there are a number of pluses, and if you're in somewhere like Europe and you're working, it's so much easier. There's some world of opportunities as well. But you also miss out on various things. And for me, for us, we always wanted for our kids to grow up in Sri Lanka and to know that they were Sri Lankan and that was their home. certainly in sort of late 90s, there was a lot of instances, and so you meet children who kind of were born in the UK or families who migrated, and obviously the parents had very close contacts with Sri Lanka and so on, but the kids didn't. They just didn't relate to it. And they come back home and just not relate to anything. And I looked at that and I just felt that's not what I would want for my kids. I wouldn't want for them to kind of be in a situation of kind of being neither fish, flesh, nor fowl. And we sort of said, well, look, let them remain. So I think it was kind of the decision to kind of come back. The time when I came back, the first time I came back was right in the middle of the JVP, height of the JVP issues, and I just remember people saying to me, "You're mad, you're going back, everybody's trying to come out and you're going back." And I said, yeah, it's just, it's what the heart wants. And, for me, I'm back here, and I'm happy to put in the effort and the time that's needed to try to be as successful personally as I can without, and not trying to compromise it. So yeah, it was definitely a tough, it was definitely a tough choice. But as I said, for me, I just felt that it was somewhere that I just wanted to be back. I was not happy, and I was not in the right place. So yeah. Do I regret?
Yep.
Oh.
Thanks, Johan. There is Ajay from UAE. He's saying, is it true that the quota utilization you mentioned with India on tea, I think there is something like 15,000 kilograms of tea for which the utilization is around 2.7%. Does that same low utilization exist in the FTA with India because of non-tariff barriers?
So it's an interesting question. I wasn't aware of the tea issue. I don't know anything about it. But so in Sri Lanka, we were looking at it, and actually, other than 2020, in the time of COVID, the utilization on the 8 million pieces has been well over 90%. So there isn't a non-tariff barrier there. That may be because the 8 million pieces isn't a lot, and maybe if it was 80 million pieces, there would be. I don't know. But right now, it's not something that's come up as an issue at all. I think in that context, I know that with regards to China, there are certain reservations because there is a view that there's a number of NTBs there, including the fact that product can be. You can go into a store, take a product, and test it, and if it fails, it has to come back. The testing standards are uniquely Chinese standards, so you can't test the product here before it goes. So I think that one's going to be more complicated. But in India, no, certainly on apparel, there's no NTBs at all.
Johan, there's a very interesting question from Imesh, works for a bank, and he's asking, currently the country is turned bankrupt. But of course, we are pursuing in a very positive manner to see how we can get the best out, and studying MBA. What advice could you give a youngster?
So I think the point is this. I would say just play for the long game. Right now there's a lot that's going on. A lot of it is short term. And I would say look at the long end. Look at the long end, because I have a number of people who contact me and call and say, just to let you know, I'm off, I'm migrating. My wife's got applied to a university, she's got in, I'm going as dependent, or the other way around, and so on. And whilst I understand the need for that, I think so a couple of things. One is the grass is not always greener on the other side. If you take the UK, and I kind of know the UK quite well, I wouldn't be jumping over to go back to the UK right now. It's going through its own share of turmoil. It's going through its own share of high prices. People are finding it difficult to live. People are finding the cost of gas going up incredibly. So there's a lot that's happening. So I think I'd play the long game. I'd kind of take the view of saying, I've never been one to kind of take these decisions in haste. It's absolutely awful here, I'm going to go. I think my advice right now is just try and see what you can do, batten down the hatches, and see how you can weather this storm through, because it hits everybody at every single level. Whether you're, if you an example, over the fuel crisis, I started cycling to work, and wherever possible, I still do it today. Not because I can manage with my fit, I've got used to it. Why do I need to? Do I really need? Do I need to rock up to work in a car? And I'm like, no, I don't, and I'd rather not. So I think the point is this: my advice would be just kind of relook at everything you're doing, and this is something I know everybody's doing at every level. You need to do this, you need to do that. Just kind of like try and take a holding position for a year, see where it goes. As an economist, I find what's going on in Sri Lanka absolutely fascinating. I wish it was happening in somebody else's country, not ours. But I'm also curious to see how this is going to pan out. What's going to happen? Does the IMF agreement come into place as we hope? Does the money come in by the end of the year? Are we able to negotiate? Are we able to restructure our debt? Are we able to get bridge financing? The banking guys know this far more than I do. But I personally find quite fascinating. As I say, I wish it was in somebody else's country. But my view would be just buckle down and just look at what's going to happen in the long term, because I do know this. For people to move and then come back is also very difficult. It was easy for me because I kind of like almost always went with the view that I'm just going for a year or two and I'm coming back. But once you get caught up in that system and so on, it sometimes becomes difficult. So I'd take the long view on it, but try and batten the hatches down for a year and see where this goes.
Thank you very much, Johan. I try my best to keep it for 50 minutes because I know that everybody who comes are very strong professionals. I know it's tough times. Appreciate sincerely your time for spending on today, which is a very special day, Teachers' Day, and of course, it's really an honor to have a person of your caliber studied abroad, come over here, and now supporting and championing our $6 billion apparel industry, which essentially is the only chamber that we have, happens to be JAF. So there's a huge onus, responsibility, especially when the economy is under severe stress. The people always go to the chambers for support. So I can just imagine what you're up to and the challenges. So Ruth, over to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johan. It was a lovely session. I think, it's not that I know definitely many of our students who've joined in either on the platform on Zoom or through our Facebook page live would have gained immense knowledge. So I have a student, an MBA student, who was messaging me as well and asking how if it's possible for her to ask some questions as well. So that goes to show that the content that you were sharing today was very valuable to them. So without taking too much of your time, I'd like to remind our industry partners, as we do at the end of each webinar, that at APIT we have an intensive internship program. And if at all you have any internship opportunities or even job opportunities during these days, to kindly forward it to us so that we may share our student CVs with you. So with this said, I would like to once again thank our distinguished guest speaker today, Mr. Johan. Thank you so much. Like Dr. Rohanta mentioned, it's a very special day, and you have done a very special service to our students by sharing your wealth of knowledge. I would also like to thank our IT team for their technical support. Without them, it would not be possible as well. And of course, to our students who joined in, as well as our corporate partners and well-wishers, both here in Sri Lanka and also abroad. So with this, I would like to wish everyone a wonderful day and evening, a good afternoon from wherever you are joining us. Have a pleasant time. Till we meet again, take care.